Philly Startup Leaders presents the 2013 Founder Factory Conference. This program was recorded November 21st, 2013 at the World Cafe Live in Philadelphia. Founder Factory thanks these sponsors for their continued financial support. In this program, opening remarks from Brendan McCorkle, Founder Factory Chair, Ken Davis of presenting sponsor Morgan Lewis, and Rick Nucci, incoming Philly Startup Leaders President. Followed by a panel discussion, when does the CEO have to start being the CEO? Transitioning teams as you scale. At the lectern is Founder Factory Chairman, Brendan McCorkle.
You guys ready to get rolling? My name is Brendan McCorkle. I'm the working chair of Founder Factory. So welcome all to the 5th annual Founder Factory. It is my job to explain to you what all of these cards are on the table. So you may notice that your name tags have dots on them that are colored, and your note cards on your table also have a color on them. Those need to match. If they don't match, please get up and move so that they match. It's very important to us to actually spread out the mix of folks we have this year. We have people self-identify as early stage entrepreneurs, late stage entrepreneurs, investors, and service providers. So we want to have a healthy mix for discussions for the workshops later in the day. So please make sure that you're actually following those rules, and we'll make sure that the discussions are lively later. My other formal task, and then I'll get out of your hair, is to thank all of our sponsors. We had a little bit of a mishap with our signage, so instead of signs everywhere saying they're awesome, I get to tell you how awesome they all are. Our headline sponsor, Morgan Lewis, is going to say a couple words. I'd like to bring Ken Davis up to the stage, tell you a little bit about Morgan Lewis and how excited they are to work with Philly, and then we'll get the ball rolling here in just a minute.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. It's my job to welcome you here on behalf of Morgan Lewis. Jeff Bodel was scheduled to be on the agenda today, but he was called away. And so he asked me to say a few words. I'm a patent attorney in the intellectual property practice at Morgan Lewis. It's not so unusual for a patent attorney to be addressing a crowd like this. I know you'd normally hear from one of our emerging growth attorneys. But you know, very often, folks like Jeff and Steve Goodman, Andy Hamilton will ask us to participate at a very early meeting with new clients and emerging growth clients because we hear from you and from others that protection of intellectual property is really a critical component to the thought process of emerging growth companies. And it's actually fitting to think about intellectual property when you think about scale up as well. The intellectual property strategy you can put together at a very early stage really can prove its worth when it's time for scale up. So, you know, scale up is the time when, you know, you're getting a lot more exposure. It can be a great thing, but there can also be a lot of competition created by people who want to either copy your idea, take your idea and expand upon it, maybe improve upon it. And so, you know, an intellectual property strategy is important when we think about scale up. So we're delighted to participate in this event. We're happy to be here. We think it's a great organization, and we thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Next, I get to introduce our opening speaker. Many of you have probably met Rick Nucci, formerly of Dell Boomi, and soon to be doing his own thing. One of my favorite Philadelphia scaling stories is actually Boomi. Boomi went through a couple of leaders at the helm before they were acquired by Dell, and my understanding, Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, is Boomi is the first acquisition by Dell that was allowed to stay where they were and not actually go to the mothership. Now that happens to be a company based in Philadelphia. So the first acquisition by Dell that wasn't made to go down to Texas. So clearly they must be doing something right. Clearly we must be doing something right, and hopefully that trend will continue. Today we're talking about scale, so you'll be hearing from a lot of people who have scaled businesses, are trying to scale businesses, or organizations like PSL who are helping the organization try to grow into a technology powerhouse. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Rick Nucci, former CTO of Dell Boomi, to talk a little bit about his experiences at Boomi and in Philadelphia.
Morning, guys. Thank you all so much for coming. As Brandon said, my name is Rick Nucci. Very excited to soon become the president of PSL. I love the organization. I love what we're about. We're about days like today. We're about making sure that genuine, authentic connections happen between people wanting to start companies, people who've started them, people who've exited them. And it's really exciting to be amongst all of you here in Philadelphia. As Brendan said, I am, in addition to that, getting ready to do another startup, and didn't hesitate in terms of where I wanted to do it. This event didn't exist when I started Boomi, so I got to make every mistake that you're going to hear not to do today, which was really awesome and fun and not at all stressful, and I highly recommend it. The hard knocks approach. I will say we got really good at making mistakes. So if we learn that piece about it, but. We went through two, big moments of scale, if you will. I guess the first one is we were in the sort of on-premise software world, and we decided to make the shift to cloud, which we learned meant changing not only the way you build products, but the way you release them, the way you sell them, the way you market them, the way you price them. Everything. It was a top to bottom change. Really hard to do, really awesome exercise. Then later, the other big scale point for us was as we began to move up market, and made a similar batch of mistakes, but along the way learned the value from those mistakes, and positioned ourselves from selling to small medium business to selling to large enterprises, which again changed the way that you talk about your product, the way you talk about your roadmap, your sales motion, your services and support and delivery model. Everything kind of changed. And so, when I looked at today's agenda, I genuinely wished that I was sitting here before I went down those two sets of roads. But nonetheless, I think that we've got an awesome group of speakers. Totally thrilled to see that they're all based here. They're all local. I hope that all of you connect with them in addition to each other, and make sure we foster that kind of mentor relationship where it might make sense, so that we can, we can help each other, because I think that's how you see communities like this continue to grow and thrive. So I'm super excited. And so anyway, I just wanted to set up what you're going to see today. Again, I appreciate everybody coming. We've got an awesome set of speakers, all focused around the notion of scaling, obviously, and what happens when you get out of that hustle stage. Not that you stop hustling, but the way you obtain your first 30 customers or 40 or 50 customers is very different from the way you obtain your next 1,000. And you're going to hear from guys and girls who have done just that. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to Brendan, and we're going to get started. Thank you, guys.
There's always a lot of semi-contentious advice that comes from the stage during this event, and we almost got one there. I think Rick almost said stop hustling, which would probably rustle a lot of feathers. So our first group is going to be David Bookspan, and now I'm totally blanking on who David's partner is going to be, but I'm going to bring David up here to kick it off, and he's going to tell you who his partner is. These guys are going to be talking about when to be a CEO and when not to be a CEO, and I'll let them introduce their talk and get rolling. My apologies. It is too early for me to be alert. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. We're completely going rogue this morning. Hello. I'm Anthony Bucci. This is my co-founder, Matt Krull from Revzilla. Obviously, you guys, a lot of you know David.
And I'm David Bookspan.
The topic of scale is very timely for us, and we're going to do a little bit of backstory for myself, Matt, and David, but it's funny, I'll say this, we have a pretty big history with the PSL, myself and Matt at least. 5 years ago, we were here for the first one. A lot of connectivity came from that day, to Rick's point about hustling. I feel like we're still sprinting, but at this point it's very much about process, it's very much about scale. And hopefully, Dave has a different experience than we do. We're in the weeds. This is Matt and myself's first rodeo. Maybe we should do a little bit of introductory and kind of go from there. I guess we're going to pass the mic.
Yeah, that's what we got to do.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Is that good? Okay, so my name's Anthony Bucci, as I said, co-founder of Revzilla.com. We play in the motorcycle space, believe it or not, but we really look at ourselves as a technology company. We sell apparel, parts, accessories. If you bought a motorcycle, everything else you'd buy from us online. We're an e-commerce company. But really the way that we look at it is we're a technology and experience company focused on the motorcycle vertical. Co-founded the company with Matt. I'm gonna let Matt talk about himself in a second here. But really where we're at is bootstrapped in 2007, launched in November. This year we've already crested 50 million in revenue. Rapidly approaching 100 employees. To give you an idea, last year at this time we had about 55 employees. Next year this time we should have 150 employees. Still bootstrapped, still going at this in kind of a three-pronged approach. Our third partner Nick's not with us today, but again, we're very much run and gun, very much sprinting, very much in scale mode, just trying to maximize the opportunity within our vertical right now.
Anthony, what's your background?
Oh, there you go. Thank you. So my background is on the technology side in e-commerce. For Revzilla, I spearhead creative marketing and media and wear a lot of the external hats. So before Revzilla, I was at a company here in Philadelphia that built e-commerce stores for Calvin Klein, Speedo, Trump, big brands that were selling direct online, mid-2000s. Thanks, David.
So I'm Matt, co-founder with Anthony. So my background really is software development, computer science, e-commerce. Worked at an agency building e-commerce platforms prior to Revzilla. Really, Revzilla it's interesting to people who don't really know us or understand what we do. Is that really technology's at our core. I mean, people ask what we do. We sell motorcycle gear and accessories online, but we're a technology company. And that's confusing to a lot of people, but it's really cool core where we build all of our technology in-house. So that's our front-end e-commerce platform, ERP systems, demand planning, replenishment, warehouse management system, retail point of sale. Everything's built in-house, and that's really been one of our key competitive advantages. At Revzilla, I kind of work on the technology side with our co-founder Nick, building out that technology. But really early on, I transitioned into more of an operational role. As we very early on, we realized that we had customers and vendors to manage and product catalog, merchandising teams to build, and all these other operational pieces. And I really ended up spearheading those pieces as we scaled. Really an attempt to help shield Nick from those pieces and focus corely on technology. And we share a lot of those hats, but then Anthony was able to spearhead then marketing, creative, and the voice, and really be our cheerleader. So Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. I'll try and be brief on my background because I'm the one who tends to find it most interesting. But I'm a lawyer by training. My good friend Steve Goodman and I were partners in law. Started my first company in 1997, which filled a void in what I found I needed in my practice. So started that in September 97. That was a company called Bookspan. Sold it in June of 2000. Took a bunch of time off to do private investing and to drive my kids crazy. And in 2007, started working on two companies, one DreamIt Ventures, which hopefully a lot of you know about, and another one, Monetate, which also hopefully a lot of you know about. So Monetate is a customer experience platform. We make it very easy for visitors to websites to have personalized experiences on those sites. Our customers are the publishers of the sites, the retailers, the various different verticals, travel, financial services, publishing generally. So let me just ask, because Brendan said something in the intro, which is how many people here have more than 30 customers? Okay, not that many. So we may freestyle a bit. and cover things that are scaling issues, but maybe scaling issues slightly before reaching that 30 customer threshold, which is a really important milestone to hit. So congratulations to those of you who have already hit it. But let me start off and ask you guys to participate in something that we do. So the three of us with Nick and sometimes with other good friends like Steve Goodman will get together for dinner occasionally and just talk shop. And it's a great time. So we'd like to invite you into that conversation and participate with us. So if you have something to add, if you have something to ask, please don't wait till the end. Jump right in and join us. Deal? Okay, great, thanks. So the topic of the session is when to stop being a CEO. And when to stop or when to start? When to stop. Okay. When to give it up. And I think that there are lots of different answers to that question, and we're going to try and cover that first, since otherwise we won't get to it. So Anthony, when is a time in the growth of Revzilla for you guys? And I'll let you discuss the distributed responsibilities within Revzilla. It's a little bit of an unusual management structure. But when is it time to hire people to do your job?
It's a challenging time, and it's a time that we're wrestling with right now. It's interesting. I think that we could have started thinking about that as early as possible, and I think that we haven't figured it out yet. To hear Rick speak this morning and talk about the hustle factor and when to start and when to stop, and I think about it right now, as soon as we found minimum viable product, I think we should have started really focusing on which pieces and which skills we should have kept and which we should have began to hire for, delegate, create teams around, or create process around. With regard to the CEO question, specifically, I don't think we figured out, internally we've done a lot of ball passing back and forth on key decision making. To the outside world, a lot of time I'll take the microphone, I'll project the vision and be the cheerleader, and we work together on the vision a lot internally as well. But when it becomes time to stop, and when it comes back to trying to think about the things operationally you can get off of your plate and begin working on the business versus in the business, I wish for us to be bootstrapped and not have a formal board of advisory, not have VC behind us. There were many cases, I think, if that would have been different early on, somebody might have shaken us and said, hey, you really need to think about all the tactical that you do and start with that, get those functional pieces off of your plate. Then think about operational, start to create process. What can you be world class at and what can you not? What should you focus on and what should you delegate away? I think even in the early stage, even pre-30 customers, I think as early as possible, if you can kind of self-identify what you can add your highest and best use and start to think about what to give away, create process, bring other folks in to help with if you can afford to do so. I don't think there is too early for that, as long as you really have a good sense of what your product market fit is, which is in many cases what we've spent so much time in the weeds trying to figure out. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Sure, I'll talk a little bit further on that. So I think in it changes as through the life cycle of the company. I think in the early stage, you have the advantage of being able to do a lot of things that don't scale. You can really be in the weeds, spend a lot of time doing tactical, and the focus is building revenue, building profitability, building the momentum behind the business. And that's great. It's one of the great advantages you have when you're small and nimble versus some of your bigger competitors or bigger companies out there. Is you can move very quickly. Decision making happens very rapidly. But as you grow, you have to be careful not getting too stuck in the weeds. When you play there, you tend to get attached. I think that was one of I'd say one of the mistakes or challenges we ran into is knowing when to delegate and when to start to really scale our responsibilities. You really need to make sure you have a focus on what's your highest and best use, and so you can make sure you stay at the strategic thinking and the higher level decision making is still happening, and you're not too mired down, stuck in the nuts and bolts of the day to day.
Both of you guys talked about highest and best use, and I think that has to be the pole star for any executive in any company, is what is the highest and best use of the people around you? What is your highest and best use? And how do you aggregate the resources that allow everybody to perform at that point? Obviously, early on in a company, you don't have any money. You can't hire too many people. You have to convince the early hires that you are able to make that, this is a rocket ship and they're lucky to get in on the ground floor. And even though you can't give them cash, you can give them a lot of love and a piece of the business.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. But my answer to the question of when to stop being the CEO is the day you become CEO is the day you want to try to start stopping being the CEO. When David Bruson, my co-founder, and I founded Monetate, when we decided we were going to greenlight the company and we were going to go forward, David called me up and said, we got to talk. And I said, okay. So we get together for lunch, and we're great friends, have a great relationship. And he said to me, you've been a CEO before. It would make perfect sense for you to be CEO here. I've been a founding CTO, but never a founding CEO, and I really feel like I want to be a founding CEO. And my response was, great, that's wonderful. You can have that. Part of the problems with being a CEO, when you think about it, ultimately, if a company is successful, you have one of three outcomes. One is that you're going to just continue with the business and you're going to run it, and that's your life's work. Another is that you're going to end up being acquired and you're going to take a look at a risk-adjusted basis. Does the offer that has come in make sense for you to take? Number three would be you're going to have an exit in the public markets. Okay, all of those are great outcomes, but with the exception of the first, how many people here became entrepreneurs to work for somebody else? Yeah, I didn't think so. How many people here want to be part of a public company or want to lead a public company? We have one, or at least I saw one. We should talk later because it's a huge mistake, I think. I want no part of a public company. I want no part of working for someone else. You know what? If you're the CEO, you know what comes along with that? Is you are the person who has to stay with the company when you're reporting to somebody else, be it the public markets or be it an acquirer. So you need to, or at least in my case, I need to, from the time I start a company, see if I can build a team that can do what I'm capable of doing better than I do it. It's healthy for the company, and it's really healthy for me. Obviously, with my first company, I was CEO, and I loved doing that, and was managed to negotiate. In fact, we took less money, as Steve Goodman will remember, we took less money than a different offer that was on the table because I didn't have to stay with the company. I can't do a great job working for somebody else at this stage in my life.
Let me ask you this question. So at this stage of the game, you've seen a few rodeos, and you're very comfortable, even when in its infancy, you're part of creating the baby, and then saying, I'm okay taking my hands off pieces of this wheel very early on. But in your first rodeo, I find for myself, it's hard to negotiate with myself to, it almost feels like prying sometimes the fingers off the wheel, where your job is to find folks that can do the same pieces that you could do 100%, 80 to 90%, ship them on time, do more quickly, scale it out. But you still run into that pang of, I enjoy doing it. I want to be a maker. I want to play there. Have you found, it seems like it's gotten easier for you, but in your first rodeo, was it as tough as it is for Matt and I sometimes to rip your hands off the wheel?
Absolutely, total control freak. I had to, in the first company, I had to make the decision on everything that went out the door, everything that we planned to do. I hope I've learned from that, and it's not that I'm not looking for things to do in the company. I'm blessed to have as a partner in Monetate one of the premier entrepreneurs, I think, in the region, and maybe the nation. David is just absolutely brilliant. And I sort of view my role as chairman of making sure we have the right executive team to support him, and that we have the right board to support the executive team. So it's not that I'm looking to not do any work. I just want to do the things that I'm good at, which is sort of keeping a gentle hand on the tiller and trying to keep us navigated in the right direction. But in the first rodeo, you're absolutely right, Anthony. It is, and I think it's a part of human nature, which is this is your first company. And its success, its failures, its troubles, its challenges are all reflective of you. And therefore, you want to make sure that everything that you touch is reflective of your decision-making. And that is really hard to do. And I also think if we're candid here, and I'll be candid, we're afraid of not having things to do, right? Because you don't have any value if you don't have things to do. So if you're giving up aspects, you feel like you don't have any value. However, as long as your mind is working and your brain is thinking, the ideal would be to come in and have nothing to do that day, except think about what's our next opportunity, what should we be doing? Because everything else is humming along really well, you've got great people, and you trust them to make decisions. And you have to avoid the part of what I think goes on psychologically is the imposter syndrome. Anthony has heard me talk about this a lot, which is, you wake up in the morning and you think, okay, today's the day that everyone's gonna find out. Right?
It's so true, and what you described. So David, myself, Matt go way back. We've been friends for 5 years. David actually rides a Harley Davidson, and the reason we know David is because I tackled another gentleman who was on a panel 5 years ago in the back hallway from the first Founders Factory, who introduced us to Dave. So we've had these conversations. Matt and I work with a business coach, and it's funny. We still haven't clearly defined who the CEO of Revzilla is internally. I mean, I think externally people see me as kind of the face of the company, but internally, like I said, we do a lot of passing the ball back and forth. But my point is that even working with the business coach that we work with regularly and then tapping our friends and mentors that have been to the top of this mountain before that we're climbing for the first time, it's very disconcerting to think. It's at times it feels, you go into this as a maker. Where the folks in the room that are starting companies, you're not going in because you're a great, I would think most aren't going in because you're saying, well, I have this great idea and I'm going to be a great manager and I'm just going to assemble a team. Maybe some have that foresight. We went in and said, well, we're going to do all the heavy lifts ourselves. We're going to go and we're going to tap all of our intellectual capital to do this because this is our skill set from web, from e-commerce, from consumer brand that we're going to apply to a vertical that we're interested in. So I had a Ducati and we're going to figure out how to learn we'll figure out the business side of that industry, but we'll apply all of our tech talent to it. But then you get down this path, and it's one of the things that I'm struggling with right now as I begin to scale my team. And I'd say that, operationally, Matt, you've done the best job of the three of us at scaling your teams when things began to come in and you needed to create great process around them. And I found myself on the marketing side to where I like to be much more collaborative, and I feel like things are much more nuanced. So I've had a really hard time letting go or building that team, but now I'm getting to a point where I'm getting a lot of great advice from guys like you guys, like, one of the guy that Matt and I work with is, actually a prolific commenter on Fred Wilson's blog. He writes his own blog now. His name's thebigredcar.com if you guys want to check it out. But he's like, your job is to come to work every day and not have anything to do, as Dave mentioned. And that is, for a founder who's used to building product, that is just such a scary thought, but you have to get over that hump. And I think myself, Matt, and Nick have gotten over that hump in different rungs, but we know the highest velocity things we can work on are the things that are the next, how does Revzilla get to Europe? How does Revzilla begin to develop its own product line? How do we create a completely new segment of business or take a deep dive to really do an audit on a unit of the business where we've not been able to be as close to as we need to? And I think it's something that it's very natural to struggle with, and I think it's very natural to feel, or we've certainly felt it, or I felt it along the way, that it's uneasy to feel like you're abdicating, or I've created this team, but if I'm not the one coming up with all of the great ideas, how am I going to be viewed internally? I had a great, I'll be completely candid, great anecdote that came from Jeff Minch recently, and he said, you have to hire people that are better than you at some of the pieces that you still want to do, and the higher up you go, you have to be more comfortable of more of the company seeing more of your backside, because it's going to happen. And at the end of the day, you've given me this great feedback over time, which makes it's kind of the security blanket when you go to bed at night. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter what your title is. You're still founder. It's still your baby. It's yours. You started it. It's your idea. You nurtured it. It's smoldered. Now it burns. And you figure out the highest and best use, or how can you nudge it? How can you create the most value for it? And it's it's a funny fence to ride sometimes. And sorry, my long diatribe there, but it's you struck a chord with me.
Come on, this is a conversation, right? You guys are at dinner with us. Anybody have anything to add? You guys are lousy dinner dates.
I think the other thing that is interesting too, when you're scaling in a high growth dynamic environment too, is that you hit certain different thresholds at different periods of time where different things break. At different times you feel like certain areas are on lockdown. We figured it out. I don't have to think about this for now. I have the right person in place. But then you grow 70%, and then 6 months later, everything's broken again. New people, process, systems, all those things need to be thought about and change frequently and scale proportionately with the other as you grow. And that can happen really fast when you're in a high growth. I think one of the challenges, really big challenges we've had is in the early stage when you're small, everything's very, very tactical. You have these very nuts and bolts pieces, and you need people to kind of hit those nuts and bolts pieces. But in your mind, you know that you're growing. You need really higher level, executive level thinking for these areas, and really, say, a director or VP level. But it's too low level. It's too nuts and bolts. The right people aren't going to be wanting to get their hands dirty 80% of the time. So you get the person in that position who can do that. 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later, now that person needs to have a team. That person might need a management hierarchy underneath them, and getting the right people in place who can scale appropriate with that growth is a huge challenge, because either they need to scale or you need to hire their boss, and sometimes that becomes a difficult conversation.
Yeah, two things that Matt touched on that I think are pretty interesting is how many people in their companies have more than 50 people?
15 or 50?
50. Okay. When you hit 50 people, everything is going to break.
Always.
Seriously. Everything will break. All the systems you have in place, all of the communication that you have set up, it's not going to work. When you hit 150 people, the same thing is going to happen. And that's just, there's been a lot of social science around this. But you need to be thinking that the systems that you're putting in place now, you can't hold on to once they start failing, once the wheels start coming off.
How about all the mini breaks in between? It's funny, anecdotally, I was just at shop.org with David, and I happened to be at Monetate's party, and I cruised by, and that's an internet retailer conference for a whole mixture of companies selling online and services to support them. And we were speaking and I think it was either you or David Bruson that said, so, oh, you guys, how big are you now? And I said, 85 people. And he said, well, it's awesome. Has it broken yet? And it's a mini break, the interstitial break, I guess, right? I said, well, it doesn't really feel broken. I said, we're working on a lot of process and a lot of planning. And he said, it hasn't felt like it broke at 85, 90 people? I said, no. He said, well, what's your schedule? And I said, well, like 7 to 7 and weekends. And then I come home at night, and then I go back to work for a few hours. He said, yeah, it's broken. I said, it's broken just because you can only brute force it so long and be sustainable. But you guys both touched on another point, which is the planning aspect, especially for us. We've constantly been peppered by sage guys like yourself, like Steve Goodman, that have asked us great questions. Well, what's the plan? What's the 18-month plan? What's the 3-year plan? Knowing that we're kind of high growth, and for us, this is the first year that we're really not growing triple digits. And I know that sounds insane, but it's really been the first year we did 1.6 million in sales, and this year we've already crested 50. So in between, it's just been a crazy hockey stick, which is awesome. But if you look at that, folks would ask you, say, what's your 3-year plan? And we would just laugh, but sadly laugh, where it's like, oh my gosh, to not drown in the deep end of the pool next week, trying to just kind of keep your head above water and think, well, what's 6 months out? There's so many huge raging fires that were big enough or low enough hanging fruit that we're just kind of tackling those things. It hasn't been until the last year to where we've really said, okay, let's take a step back. Let's look at our meeting cadence. Let's look at who we're spending time with on our team. Let's look at it as an executive team. If I'm creative in marketing, not in a bubble, not in a silo, really collaboratively working with Matt and Nick a lot and our teams. But what are my priorities for this year? What do I think the biggest opportunities are to the company that not only does my team need to be able to execute on, but I'm going to need resource and buy-in from Matt and Nick, from our other teams, from finance, budget allocation, all of those things. And how do we have enough time to be able to get into the weeds on those issues that's not just tactical time, not an hour touch base a week? I'll be honest, we're 6 years in. We turned 6 last Thursday, as a company. And October was the first time we ever did a management retreat. And we all looked at each other and said, wow, that really should have happened 3 years ago. And that was our 3 founders and 3 senior guys who are managing big business units, finance, customer experience, and fulfillment. And we went to the Poconos for 2 days. And I swear we worked 30 hours in a 48-hour span. It was like catnip for us. But it just felt so good to actually spend time not being rushed, not somebody has to go, not somebody's distracted in that meeting, to really assign goals, takeaways, and accountability on what's going to be the next piece to get us over that hump. But it took us 6 years to get there. And I'm not sure if somebody should have shaken us harder 3 years ago to do it, but we finally had the bandwidth to say, and it took planning to get the most out of that. Was really us coming and sitting down and saying, these are all tactical, take them off the table. What are the big strategic issues that allow us to keep our growth like this, as it's now getting harder and harder to keep top line? I mean, there are only so many customers, there are only so many things we can do. There's only so much time that you can sprint in a vertical doing things differently that the customer loves, that creates that chasm between you and your competition and allows us to steal market share and create new market. We're the most copied player in our space right now. So we really need to innovate now and go from 0 to 1 again in new ways to think about, not just motorcycle retail, but online commerce in general, because it's becoming commoditized. The great white shark of Amazon's coming for us. They're trying, at least. All of these things are just accelerating and moving so quickly. I mean, I know now I'm kind of digressing a little bit, but it's the planning aspect. It's so many of those pieces that it's taken us by the scruff of the neck to pull ourselves out of the weeds just to get there this year. I'm going to stop for a second. Does anybody have any questions about any of those issues? Or go ahead, down front. Your name, sir?
Carlos. Yeah, so you were talking before about letting go a little bit, and part of that's hiring people you trust. So I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit to, it's like a delicate balance, right? At the early stage, you have to hire people who are willing to follow your vision. Those people might want to be entrepreneurs themselves, right? So you have to find someone who has that passion and you can kind of mold and you can trust, but also they're not just going to leave you after a couple of months. So it's about the trust too, right? So if you guys can speak to that a little bit.
There are a few points there. There's also the one, I'll just quickly add before I hand the mic off. Matt, go. This is right in your wheelhouse. There's also the folks that join you early because they're excited, and they're excited there's a lot of movement, and they get to touch a lot of things. Whether they want to be entrepreneurial or not, you find that as you begin to scale teams around them, as different elements of the business mature, certain folks definitely wash out. There's definitely talent turnover. I'm seeing it in my team because I spent the last 18 months really focused on scaling marketing. When we had some on the operational side early on, where you'll just see them kind of come and go, or the cracks in the hull are magnified as now that there's more traditional structure and better, really the truth is better bandwidth and better management around those teams. I mean, you run into that as well. Go ahead, you can dive in.
Yeah, I think you really need to be willing to give someone the rope when you bring them on. You need to be able to trust them, or they're not going to have a chance. So I would say trust but verify. And I think you need to make sure you're bringing out people who are smart. For us, is we looked at people who are smart, resourceful, proactive, entrepreneurial. And the trust has to come with it. Come with that. I mean, some trust can be earned over time, for sure. But someone who comes on has to be given at least enough rope to be given enough window to be successful. If they're kind of stifled or micromanaged, they're just going to be suffocated out. So I think I've been really successful at bringing on smart people and giving them enough room to be successful and build out their own processes and systems as they go, but while managing and being an advisor and coach to them. I think that's the important thing. As a manager, you're more of a coach and an enabler. If you start kind of falling down the rabbit hole of micromanaging, it's just not going to work.
Let me ask you this. Do you find a difference in passion between people who are into motorcycling and people who are not at your company?
So the question was, do we find a difference in passion for people who are passionate for motorcycling and those that are not? I'd say for customer-facing, product-specific, vertical-specific positions, absolutely. They have to be a diehard, they have to be an enthusiast, and that's a core requirement. For some of the other positions, say software developer, that sort of thing, it's more of a nice to have. It's great for them to have that because now they're going to have an instant connection with a lot of the rest of the staff, but it's not a core requirement. And I think at their core, they need to be passionate for what we're doing. They don't necessarily have to be passionate for motorcycles specifically.
But we've also seen some of our biggest successes is, in the motorcycle industry, a lot of people don't realize that you think about your guy doing a wheelie down 95 in a t-shirt, which is really a bad example of what we do. Most of our customers are like David, are a little bit older or sophisticated. There's a responsibility factor. What's been cool for us is that you think about e-commerce, there are a lot of people that are tech people that work in e-commerce, that they're passionate or their hobby. No one needs what we do. It's complete discretionary hobby here in the US, outside of some folks that do commute to work. Europe is different. There's a huge, half the market's utilitarian. But if you look at that, we've actually been really fortunate that we've been sought out by customers. It's like, hey, I'm in my mid-30s. I'm a hardcore technologist. I happen to ride a scooter. I'm passionate about it. I've been shopping with you forever. I love what you do. I will move from Wisconsin to come work for you. That's been a neat factor. I mean, we really have two companies in one, trying to keep the culture as one company, but you have consumer-facing, which is motorcycle-centric, domain-centric, and then some of our most successful marketing, creative, tech, merchandising hires, and merchandising has to be domain-specific, but are domain-centric, but have been folks that love the sport too. But we have a handful of thriving employees that want to be in an entrepreneurial environment that just appreciate the fact that we feel as much like a tech company and a startup still as we do a moto company internally. I mean, if you walked into our company, you think I'm at a technology company, you'd see bikes around on the floor as kind of where we park our bikes indoors, over the winter and different times of the year, but it doesn't scream long beards and bandanas and Sturgis. It doesn't scream that. It's definitely a different spin on it. David?
Yeah, I don't have any ink. But to get back to the question, and I think it was Carlos's question, about you're hiring people early on who are taken with the vision and want to be entrepreneurs themselves. I'm assuming that everybody, including the service providers in this room, are at some level entrepreneurs. But how many of you had your idea before you had experience in a startup? Okay. A lot of you probably were attracted to the startup lifestyle, but didn't really know what business you wanted to start. So that, I think, Carlos, is a lot of the early people who you are hiring. There are a lot of people out there. My son just graduated from Pitt in April, and he wants to be a startup guy. And he decided that he wanted to first learn sales, particularly sales. So he took a job with Yelp, and he moved to Scottsdale, and he's been there for 4 months. And he said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to learn sales from an organization that has a tremendous sales culture, sales organization. I'm going to learn to do it right. I figure I'll be there 1 to 2 years. Then I want to go and get a biz dev role. And I'll do that for 1 to 2 years, and then I'll either start a company or maybe go to business school. So that was his 5-year plan. I got a call from him last week saying, Dad, I've got this great business idea. I'm really excited about it. What do you think? So, we started talking it through. When you're in the environment, the idea will hit, or an idea will hit. It could be wrong, it could be total failure, but an idea that you're passionate about will hit. And what you have to do when you're hiring people in this role, and I'm sorry if I'm getting preachy here because I said what you have to do. You don't have to do anything. But my view is that I never want to stand in the way of somebody's career. If they have something that they're passionate about that they want to do, if I've been able to help them get there, that's a win. That's a win on all sides. So that doesn't mean we won't fight for employees. If somebody gets an offer, I'm joking because we had this situation. These guys tried to hire away one of our core people, and we fought for that person, and we won. But yeah, well, it was uncomfortable for Anthony. It was perfectly comfortable for me, which is if you have an opportunity that's better than what we have to offer, I want this person to take that job. It's just a healthy ecosystem to be part of, to really support people's careers. So, Carlos, there's no guarantee that somebody who you hire early on, particularly if they're a rock star, won't at some point say, this has been great, I've learned a lot, I love you, I want to do something on my own. And it's very hard at that point, especially when you're at the point where you need to outthink because you don't have the money to outspend in growing your company. It's very hard at that point to say, I love you, Godspeed, let me know how I can help. that comes back to pay incredible dividends if you can adopt that. So again, I'm sorry for the soapbox on this one, but it's something that I feel really strongly about. Yes?
Hello, my name is Peter. First, I want to congratulate you guys. It's incredible feat. I've scaled the company from 5 to 10 million. We broke at that point in e-commerce. All the cracks became enormous and are least profitable here by far. So I can understand those challenges, but the question I have for you is, as you go from obviously your bootstrap and you're tight on cash, founders will work cheaply or for nothing because they have to. But at some point, when you just start generating cash flows, equity is an expensive way to get employees on. How do you go across that gap of you don't really have enough to pay them a fair wage, you can't really give up any more equity? When does that happen, and how do you get across it to get what you need to keep it going?
I'm going to field that question because these guys have a different approach than a company that is venture funded. They're not. They own 100% of their company, and that's a really sweet position to be in. That was the position I was in my first company. And if you can do that, do that. People celebrate the day that they get funded. I tend to mourn that day for people. If you have a business where you need a lot of capital, or you need some capital that you don't have in order to grow it, you have no choice but to get funded. But anyhow, let me come back to the question. If it's that type of company, if you're going to be taking in outside investors, I believe very strongly that everyone in the company, from the receptionist to the CEO, should have some equity in the company. It's critical to have it be on a vesting schedule. And everybody understand vesting schedules? Or should I explain it? Okay, everybody's got it then. I typically recommend that it be a 1-year cliff, 4-year vest. So they get 25% of whatever that initial grant is on their first anniversary, and from there on in, the remaining 75% vests over the next 3 years. When you're young, you have 2 forms of currency. You've got cash and you have equity. And you have to pay people a fair wage. It's not always a living wage, but you have to pay them a fair wage. And the question is, what currency are you using to do that? So if you're trying to get somebody, we all abuse interns, unfortunately. I think that they do get an experience, if you do it right. They're going to get an experience, which is a different form of currency that you're able to give them. So, query whether it's true abuse or not.
How old are they because your son was in it?
Yeah. So the balance that you have to strike is, how much cash am I going to give this person? How much cash can I give this person? And I have to make up in equity the remainder for it to be a fair wage. As the company gains value and as cash frees up, the component of equity, what you end up doing, and guys like the sponsors here, Steve Goodman, Mike Crossley, Jeff Bodel, the Morgan Lewis guys, the Crossley guys, what you end up doing is you just end up having a ridiculous number of shares that you split the company into. So you're giving somebody, 25,000 shares, which represents, 0.01% of the company. But the currency is, what's the share price? What's the share price worth? So I think you do need to keep people engaged and fairly compensated with whatever form of currency you have at the time.
For us, that was a big challenge. Early on, I think how we got around that, we had a major focus on revenue and chiefly profitability. We were really focused on our burn rate. We had enough savings to last us in the beginning 6 months or so without paying ourselves, and then we needed to figure out a way to generate enough money to pay our rent and not be depleting our bank accounts. But 1 to 2 years in, it was still really just us and maybe a couple of key operational hires. And I think that was a really challenging time where we didn't want to give up the equity, and we really wanted to, I guess, really exhaust ourselves as much as possible to really get to the point the breaking point until we really needed to do that. And we were able to pull through and get through without giving up any equity and paying people a fair market rate. So that came through working long hours, 14, 15, 16 hour days for a long time, and taking very minimal sustenance wage for years, really. And I think we were also in a unique position to an extent to do that with 3 co-founders with differing but complementary skill sets. So really the roles we were playing, Anthony was CMO, CEO, I was playing the COO role, and our other partner, Nick, was playing the CTO role, which really gave us a lot of runway, a lot of intellectual capital before we had to bring in other executive level hires. And that 3-4 years in, that became really the big challenge, was that now we really need to start building out more of the executive hierarchy. And that's still a big challenge today, where, as we talked earlier, keeping our hands too close, because we've done it so long, keeping our hands on the wheel for too long before bringing in that executive management team has been a challenge.
I mean, for a little bit of scope, I mean, so Matt mentioned sustenance wage. I mean, that was 3 years of that. I mean, we 3 years of really just barely paying our rent. I mean, I have children. I mean, it was a slog for us. It really was. It was as tough as everybody always talks about it. It is. I mean, another data point is that, I mean, 27 months ago, maybe a little less, we had 14 employees. I can remember really clearly hiring our 14th employee. He was our finance guy now. I mean, so really for us to go from 14 to 90 people has been roughly 24 months, which has felt like a lot to absorb, and we figured out all the things we suck at with regard to hiring, and Carlos's question earlier, and we spent a lot more time vetting out the superpowers of what we really think we need before we go in at this point. But the equity conversation, whether, every 6 months as a company, we've evaluated what does the momentum around buy us. We're way past the back of the napkin, but there are folks that might invest in our cause or believe in our vision. There's enough runway for us. What does it get us? Is it a foot race to infrastructure? Is it a foot race, that additional equity or that capital coming into additional folks? Now we're kind of entering this next realm, which is kind of twofold, having an equity conversation again, which we really haven't crossed the chasm yet. Matt, Nick, and I still each own a third of the company. And it's a very powerful and great spot to be in, with its own issues, when it comes to the board advisory that we don't have, and certain things that we don't have access to that a backed company would have. When it comes down to it, we think about our best employees, our senior guys that have been with us from the beginning, that might have a head count of, 10 or 20 people reporting to them on their org chart, and you say, okay, they may need a long-term incentive plan at some point in the near future. Obviously, if Revzilla goes to the pay window, we are going to think in the terms of that everybody should really go to the pay window with us in some form, even if it's not written down on a piece of paper. But then you also think about the flip side of that, which is, I was just having this conversation recently as we talk about, Matt and I we're knee deep in the Amazon book right now, and we're talking about, having conversations about how can we accelerate the cannibalization of our own skill sets with better folks that are more seasoned, that can just race it further faster. It was funny. I sent a note recently to a VC friend of ours about a high-level exec that left one of the high-flying e-commerce companies that, this all happened in the last couple of weeks. And we said, well, what does that mean? I said, that's not somebody that you get by paying fair wage or even above market. That's somebody that's going to come in and want a stake in the company. And what is it worth to us to change the dynamic of an LLC to now really be thinking about how the complexities of what that means to us, the new person on the team, as well as what it really, the signal it sends to the rest of the staff where, well, we have kind of broken form now. The conversation has been opened, and what should it really look like? Because certainly we don't want to lose our best employees that have been with us for 3-4 years that need to stay with us for another 3 or 4 if we're going to stay at the helm and scale this further. I don't know, just kind of piggybacking on your comments.
Coming back to the hiring question and hiring, I'm sorry, was there, yes?
So, my name is Scott Latham, and I'm the founder of Collaboration. We're a fashion tech company in Philadelphia, and talk about scaling your team. The last 6 months, we've scaled our team from about 3 or 4 to 11 or 12 employees. Some of those members are present in the audience today. What would be a word of advice for those people who want to take ownership over their role and be that leader going forward? I guess that's the question.
My answer is, and I'm sorry, are you the founder? And your name's Scott? Scott, I think a lot of it is going to come from you. It's what culture you establish within the company. Are these people free to make mistakes? How hard are you on them when they make a mistake? If you want to give them, if you want them to perform at their best level, give them as much rope as you can, Let them move fast and come and ask. If they can't reach you for an approval or a decision that needs to be made, they should make it themselves and come to you when they can. And if they screwed something up, I'll give you an example. This is way back in the day in my first company, and it's one of the moments I'm really pretty proud of myself for. We had no money. My lead developer, she was our first employee. She had not backed up her work. Not an issue today, but she had done coding and had lost about a week's worth of work when the disk crashed. She came to me and said, you know, I've got some really bad news. I screwed up. I didn't back up, and I lost a week's worth of coding. She had already found a forensic repair shop in New Hampshire that could reconstruct the disk, and it was going to cost us about $2,000 to have them do that. And so she had done the work to find out what the solution to the problem was. And she came to me and she said, you know, I'm really feeling bad. We had very, very little cash at this time. And she said, I feel really bad. Take it out of my pay. You know, it's my mistake, take it out of my pay. And the part that I'm proud of is my immediate response was, if it cost me $2,000 to have a better trained engineer, I'm really happy to make that investment. And so that also led to a tremendous bond between the two of us and a lot of trust going forward. So it really is whatever culture you set from the beginning of the company. Is this a place where people have to worry that they're going to get fired for making a mistake? Yeah, if you make a big mistake, you deserve to be fired, and that comes with the territory. But do you have the freedom to make that mistake? You need to have, I believe that every executive in the organization needs to feel they have the freedom to make mistakes. Otherwise, you're not moving fast enough.
Yeah, to add a little bit to what Dave was talking about, I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, one of our core values is take risks but wear a helmet. So we encourage our employees to take calculated risks. It's okay to fail, but wear a helmet. You shouldn't you shouldn't be risking the business with your risk. But we definitely encourage calculated risk taking. And also to reiterate, I mean, as the founder, I mean, you really are setting the tempo. And I think at 11 employees, I mean, really thinking more about culture and the core values of the company really starts to become important. And I think that's something that we fortunately really talked about early on, and I think has been a really success. And we've been able to build and keep a great culture as we've scaled. And I think that really is critical. And it really becomes apparent as you continue to grow past 11. It's just the amount of communication. When you have 11 employees, it's relatively straightforward and easy to have communication with those employees. But when you go from 11 to 20 to 30, now you really need to almost replicate yourself and your values so they can be the culture ambassadors for the other employees.
What's your favorite cultural hack around your guys' company that really helped making scaling all the challenges and problems you guys face over that
Culture hack.
I've got one.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. How much time do we have, Brandon? 0. Okay. So we'll be done in 10 minutes. We will tie it up. One of my favorite cultural, or this is actually a management technique rather than a cultural technique. I hate meetings. Absolutely hate meetings. And I define a meeting as more than 2 people working on something at the same time. 2 people, I want collaboration. I'll suffer through 3 people working on an issue. So defining meeting is more than 2 people in a room working on an issue together. I had in my first company, and this is when we were 15 people. Doesn't work when you're 150 people. Doesn't work when you're 30 people. But it did work because it worked up to 48 people for us, which was you could have as many meetings as you want. Go ahead, schedule as many meetings as you want, as long as they're before 8:30 and after 4:30. Okay. Otherwise, you are not maximizing your hours. Otherwise, so there tended to be fewer meetings, and they tended to be more efficient that way.
Quickly adding on to that, I mean, yeah, meetings are a big thing. We're not as quite anti-meeting as Dave is, but figure out what the right meeting cadence, so to make sure that you're getting the value out of those. I mean, there's a great book called Death by Meeting, which really talks about the right meeting cadence and how to structure those meetings. The other quick cultural hacks, one thing is just look for inspiration outside your company. I mean, there's a lot of great companies who have thought a lot about this. Look at Amazon's core values. Look at Zappos. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there that you can be inspired by. And to your first question, I think advice for your employees is, one, really think like an owner, act like a founder. I mean, really take ownership and invest yourself and have the mindset of ownership, and that's going to go a long way. And also embrace your own personal growth and learning. So the company's growing, so making sure you're evolving yourself is extremely important. There's so many great resources out there, so many great blogs from amazing, great minds and business leaders, that make sure you're taking advantage of that.
One final thing to add, I know we're out of time, on core values. Try to crystallize them. We waited a really long time, and we had 3 of us that were friends first, so had a shared worldview, and kind of imparted that to our staff at 12, 15, 20 people. We didn't crystallize those on paper until the last year or 2, but we found that once we did and we measured people by them, it became much easier to keep everybody in lockstep, much easier to have the same message permeate, because what happens now at 90 people, as founders, it's great that we started it, it's great that it's our baby and we're the parents, but the best we can do is nudge it now. The culture is organic, it takes on a life of its own, the way people work, interact with each other, and one of our core values is no jerks allowed, and we've been really good at living up to it. So I know it's one of those things when the whole world's on fire and you're trying to find minimum viable product. It's like, do I have time to sit down and craft this? Even if it's just jotting some things down that get you there sooner, we could have done it years ago, and it would have made life easier as a great filter for who we bring on and how we measure folks on our team outside of just performance.
Yeah, and we'll wrap up, I promise. My last statement on this point is, it sounds sort of cute or hackneyed, but write up a mission statement very early on in the company. Just a 1 or 2 sentence mission statement. What are you trying to do in your business? You will find, and why are you doing it? And then continue drafting core values. And as Anthony said, put them down on paper. Commit them to paper, add to them, have it grow. What is important to you? What's important to the company? What's important to the employees? What's important to your partners? And be the company, this is an Army commercial, be the company you want to be.
But you got to make, when you do that, you got to make sure that you really believe what you're putting down on paper.
Absolutely.
You live by it. That has to be authentic. It's bullshit. People will pick it up so fast, and it will hurt.
Yeah, that's a great point. In everything you do, you have to have an authentic voice. Okay.
You're going to have to steal the microphone.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.
We hope you enjoyed this program from Philly Startup Leaders. For more information, visit phillystartupleaders.org. This program is a production of Professional Podcasts, a division of the Lubetkin Media Companies in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, on the web at lubetkin.net. If you'd like to purchase DVDs of Founder Factory programs, visit our online store, lubetkin.net/CubeCart. For everyone at Philly Startup Leaders, this is Steve Lubetkin. Thank you for joining us, and take good care.